We have got breaking news crossing. The House just passed an Iran war powers resolution. 4 Republicans joined Democrats in voting to rein in Trump's military action. I want to bring in MS Now's Kevin Fry on the Hill. Kevin, what happened?
Yeah, Steph, look, I mean, this is the same 4 Republicans that joined with Democrats the last time the House passed one of these resolutions, which is several weeks ago. But of course, this is notably coming after we saw this renewed escalation in the conflict just over the weekend, in that a handful of U.S. service members who were killed as part of this. Now, of course, this isn't necessarily going to come with any form of teeth to it, because as we know, the one that passed a few weeks ago, it passed in both the House and the Senate, but it didn't actually have to, and this is all in the procedural mumbo gumbo, but it didn't actually have to get signed off by the president. So its legal enforceability is very much in question. Nonetheless, it of course allows Democrats to send a message, especially heading into the midterms, especially heading right into the August recess, that Republicans are okay with this war and they're willing to give the president unfettered power to go ahead.
Hey guys, John here. Both chambers of Congress passed a war powers resolution directing Trump to end Iran military operations. Unless Congress authorizes continued action, the first such rebuke in over 50 years. The close votes revealed deep fractures within the Republican Party itself. Trump didn't lose because of Democrats. Trump lost because Republicans broke ranks. 4 Republicans in the House voted with Democrats. And in the Senate, 4 Republican senators voted to tell Trump he can't keep doing this anymore. Their names are Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, Susan Collins from Maine, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, and Rand Paul from Kentucky. These are Republican senators who looked at their party's leader and said, no, we're drawing the line here. We're not going to support this approach.
The Senate is also expected to be voting on a similar resolution in the next hour, so we will see we'll have a chance to see if any additional Republicans will join on that side with Democrats to try to put some constraints on this war. Within the last week, we have already seen Democrats here on the Hill transition to a new strategy to try to put a check here by, for example, voting against the annual defense bill, trying to derail extra funding for the Defense Department as a way to put other guardrails on this conflict. So Democrats are kind of coming to the realization that the war powers alone are not going to cut it if they want to put an end to this conflict.
Kevin, thank you. All right, reining in some presidential power.
Yeah, well, and I think the key phrase there isn't much teeth to this. I think, you know, and would Donald Trump pay attention to this? You know, he's not really into checks and balances these days. This war is about as popular as Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. You know, he's down in the low 30s in terms of approval ratings. And I think 2/3 of the country is against this war right now.
Meanwhile, one Democrat, John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, voted against it. So this isn't just partisan anger at Trump. This is actual fractures in Republican support for his Iran policy. This is Republicans breaking ranks. And that's the real story that everyone should be paying attention to. The White House is already trying to spin this into irrelevance. They're saying the ceasefire that went into effect back in April ended the fighting anyway, so there's nothing to enforce. They're claiming there are no active hostilities, so there's nothing for the troops to withdraw from. And in some ways, technically, they're right. The military conflict did scale down significantly. We're not seeing daily airstrikes anymore. We're not seeing American troops dying in the region. The immediate crisis atmosphere passed. But that's exactly why Congress did this.
That's why those Republicans crossed over and joined the Democrats. It's, you know, this is about the only way they can pass legislation these days is when the Republicans join the Democrats on something that's pretty popular, like reining in Trump. But this war is getting more and more unpopular. And as you were saying earlier, you know, there is some talk that maybe he could wrap this up by the fall. You know, how many times have they said this?
We've been hearing that. When do we hear it? Every Sunday night before the market opens on Monday.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah, I think, you know, as I said, from the perspective of younger people, I think this needs to be further humanized beyond kind of the gas prices. There was a young veteran I sat with a couple of weeks ago who had to choose. He went back to Texas to work in his parents' restaurant. He cut his hand in the kitchen. He had 9 stitches. He had to choose between anesthesia, which was separate than the stitches, and his rent. $800. So he told me he raw dogged it. Okay. That's a veteran.
Wow.
That's someone who volunteered
They didn't do it because they need to end a shooting war that's still raging right this second. They did it because they're asserting a principle. They're telling Trump and every future president that you don't get to decide when America goes to war. Congress does. That's what the Constitution says. That's how the system was designed to work. And if you keep acting like the Constitution doesn't apply to you, we're going to make you stop. This is institutional pushback. This is Congress remembering that it actually has power over these decisions. And here's what makes this even more significant. This is the first time since 1973, since the War Powers Resolution became law after Vietnam, that both the House and Senate have passed a resolution directing a president to remove U.S. forces from hostilities. 51 years, 5 decades.
To serve our country, just like the 20 veterans every single day. We talked about, your family's history, Dan, who lose their lives by suicide. Like, this is what's happening. And when we cavalierly talk about not just the young men and women who passed away this week, who died this week, but the 100 or so with potentially brain injuries since the 4th of July.
Just to be clear, there was no suicide in my family. We were talking about my dad's service in the Army. I just want to be really clear about that. And, I think it's really important, as you mentioned, John, the human element of this, and then we go back to the economic element or the political element. A lot of these Republican congresspeople, they have to go back into their districts, right? And this is going to happen in the next couple of weeks. And is it that they separate themselves? Do they put more sort of sunlight between the policies that are going on here, especially when you have something like that passes? This could be a very interesting time as we we know once we get to Labor Day, it's over. It's a sprint, towards the midterms. And I think a lot of stuff that happens over the next 5-6 weeks is really going to be determinant of, how this kind of,
Then help us with this list. Obviously,
multiple presidents, plenty of military operations and conflicts, and nobody, not a Democratic president, not a Republican president, nobody has had to face both chambers of Congress voting publicly to tell them to stop a war until now, until Trump. That tells you something about how far things have shifted in American politics. Either Trump is pushing the envelope in ways previous presidents didn't, or Congress is finally willing to push back in ways it hasn't been before. Probably both are true. But this moment matters because it's the moment Congress is saying there's actually a line. There's actually a limit to what a president can do, and we're going to enforce it. Now, let me explain what a war powers resolution actually is, because this is where most people get genuinely confused.
everything around the war is not winning for this president. So he's now diverting our attention and taking us back to tariffs. Okay, his top trade negotiator said the strategy is not changing. It is full steam ahead. The Supreme Court may have shot them down. We're going to look for a new way to implement them. Who, at this point, is the voting base who's saying right on? Because the argument early on where he said, this is America first, we're going to bring manufacturing jobs back, even if he could sell that last year, we now have a year's worth of data where manufacturing jobs have dropped, jobs across the board have dropped. Who is he making this argument to that it's winning for? Not businesses, not consumers, not the American voter.
Yeah, and it's similar to the Iran war. No one asked for the Iran war. No one is asking for these tariffs, and they undermine two of his key campaign promises: no more wars, and I'm going to tackle prices. And there's a direct line between this war, between the tariffs, and prices going up. And if you look at certain states where we have very big elections this year,
they hear Congress passed a war powers resolution, and they think it's like Congress declared war, or Congress authorized military force, or Congress passed some binding law that immediately stops everything the president is doing. And none of that happened here. A war powers resolution is what's called a concurrent resolution. That means it doesn't go to the president for his signature. It doesn't have the force of law like a statute does. It's more like Congress formally writing down what it thinks should happen and sending it to the president as a statement. Congress is saying, we think you should do this, and we're doing it publicly in front of everyone with votes on record. But legally speaking, in terms of binding authority, it doesn't automatically strip the president of his commander-in-chief authority. It doesn't force him to do anything. It's a political statement backed by institutional weight. So here's the real question everyone's asking. If it doesn't have the force of law, then what's the point? Why did Congress spend all this time and political capital on something that doesn't actually force Trump to do anything? The answer is institutional pressure. The answer is that Congress is reasserting itself after decades of not using its power. Because here's what's been happening in American politics for a really long time. The executive branch has been slowly accumulating more and more power over war decisions. Presidents started making military decisions without Congress. Presidents started ordering strikes, deployments, operations, all without going to Congress and asking permission. Congress complained sometimes, Congress held hearings, Congress made speeches, but mostly Congress just let it happen. Congress abdicated its constitutional responsibility. And then Trump came in and he took that existing practice and pushed it even further. He started treating military decisions like they were purely his personal executive decisions. No need to consult Congress. No need to explain to Congress what he's doing. Certainly no need to ask Congress for permission before launching military operations. So Congress is finally saying, hold on, we're not going to do this anymore. You can't just treat war like it's your personal decision to make. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. The Constitution says Congress decides whether America goes to war, not the executive branch, Congress. And we're going to prove we remember that by voting on it publicly. We're going to put our names on it. We're going to be on record. Now let's talk about the White House response, which was pretty predictable. They said the resolution doesn't apply because there's already a ceasefire in place. They said the ceasefire ended the active hostilities, so there are no troops to remove because the fighting already stopped. So Congress is just voting on something that doesn't matter anymore. They're trying to make it look like Congress is just wasting time on political theater. But that argument misses the entire point of what Congress is actually doing. Because Congress wasn't voting to end an active war that's still happening right this second. Congress was voting on principle. Congress was voting to assert that it has a role in these decisions. Congress was voting to say that if this starts up again, if there's a new escalation, a new incident, a new set of strikes, the president is not going to be able to just do it without them. He's going to have to come back and ask. Or if he doesn't ask, they're going to vote on this again. And next time, they might make it binding. They might make it an actual law. They might use the power of the purse. This is Congress rebuilding its institutional muscles after decades of not using them. This is Congress remembering that it actually has power over these decisions. This is Congress saying that the executive branch has been acting like Congress doesn't matter, but Congress does matter, and they're going to prove it. What makes this particularly significant is the vote counts. 215 to 208 inches the House, 50 to 48 inches the Senate. These are incredibly tight margins. If 3 people flip in the Senate, this fails. If 2 people flip in the House, this fails. These margins tell you something important. This is not overwhelming bipartisan consensus. This is Congress almost evenly divided. But what's more significant than the overall margins is where the votes are coming from. In the House, you've got 4 Republicans who voted with Democrats. In the Senate, you've got 4 Republicans who voted with Democrats. These Republicans broke party lines to support this measure. That might not sound like a lot. 4 votes might seem small, but in tight margins like this, 4 votes is everything. 4 votes is the difference between passing and failing. So without Republican defections, this dies in the House. It doesn't even get to the Senate for a vote. This only passes because Republicans broke ranks. And then in the Senate, you've got 4 Republican senators voting yes. Bill Cassidy, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Rand Paul. These are serious senators. These aren't backbenchers. These aren't junior members nobody's heard of. Cassidy is a former physician who brings medical expertise to debates. Collins is a moderate from Maine, which is a swing state, so she's generally pretty careful about how she votes. Murkowski is a former state legislator who's shown she's willing to vote against Trump before. Paul is the libertarian wing of the Republican Party. All 4 said the same thing Congress said. The Constitution matters. Congress's power of the purse matters. Congress's power to declare war matters. You can't just ignore those powers because you think it's the right thing to do militarily. That's not how the Constitution works. And one more thing, one Democrat, John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, voted against it. So even Democrats aren't unanimous on this. Fetterman said no. Fetterman, who's generally been skeptical of Trump, voted against this war powers resolution anyway. That tells you this wasn't just partisan tribalism. Here's the context most people aren't getting. This isn't the first time Congress tried to do this. Back in March, just a few months ago, there was an earlier measure. It failed 53 to 47. Congress voted on this same general principle. Congress should have power over whether we keep fighting Iran. And it failed. It didn't pass. The votes weren't there. Trump supporters could claim victory. They could say, look, Congress tried to constrain the president and it failed. We won. But then in the months since March, something changed significantly. Congressional resistance grew. More Republicans started questioning the Iran policy after seeing how it was playing out. More Democrats started pushing harder on the constitutional question. The political environment shifted. More senators and representatives started thinking, maybe Congress actually does need to step in here. Maybe this is worth the political capital. Maybe this is worth being on record about. And by June, when they took the vote again, it passed. Just barely, but it passed. That tells you something important. It tells you the needle is moving. It tells you that even within Trump's own party, there's growing concern about unchecked executive power on military decisions. This isn't stagnant. This is getting worse for Trump politically. This suggests that if there are future votes on Iran policy, if there are future military escalations, Congress is more likely to push back, not less likely. What's also significant is the context of American history on this. The 1973 War Powers Resolution was passed after Vietnam. Congress was furious that Presidents Johnson and Nixon just kept escalating the war in Vietnam without asking Congress for authorization. Congress felt like it had been lied to, manipulated, dragged into an endless war because presidents just kept saying, "Trust me, this is necessary, we got this." Congress said, never again. We're going to pass a law. We're going to say that if presidents use force, they have to notify Congress within 48 hours. They have to explain what they're doing. And if Congress doesn't authorize it within 60 days, they have to stop. That was the 1973 framework. It's been the law for 51 years. And in all that time, 5 decades, no president faced both chambers, voting to tell them to remove troops from hostilities until now, until Trump. That's not insignificant. That's not nothing. That's a constitutional moment that historians are going to be writing about for decades. So let's break down what actually happened here and why it matters. First thing, Congress reasserted itself as a co-equal branch of government after a very long period of being passive. For decades, Congress has been pretty inactive on these military questions. Congress passed the War Powers Resolution in 1973, but then Congress basically didn't enforce it. Congress didn't use its power. Presidents kept doing military operations without going to Congress. Congress complained sometimes. Congress held hearings. Congress made speeches. But mostly, Congress just let it happen. They got used to it. They got comfortable with it. It became normal. And then Trump came in and he pushed even further than previous presidents. Trump treated military decisions as purely his executive decision to make. No consultation with Congress. No legal framework, no explanation, just, I'm the president, I make the call, that's my power. And finally, after years of this, Congress said, enough. We're voting on this, we're making it official. We're on record saying you can't keep doing this without us. That's an important institutional moment. Long overdue, but important. Second thing, this is a major crack in Republican support for Trump's foreign policy. The fact that 4 House Republicans and 4 Senate Republicans voted against Trump on this is genuinely significant. These aren't crazy left-wing activists. These aren't Trump haters. These are serious Republican lawmakers who've served for years. They're saying Trump's approach crosses a constitutional line. They're saying Congress matters. They're saying the Constitution matters more than party loyalty. Now, the media has been playing this as Congress rebuking Trump, and that's true. But it's more accurate to say Congress, including members of Trump's own party, is rebuking Trump. That's important because it means this isn't just partisan opposition to Trump. This is actual institutional concern from people inside the Republican Party. This is Republicans saying, we're worried about presidential power here, not just about what Trump's doing, but about what any future president could do. That matters. That matters a lot for future votes. If there are more votes on Trump's military authority, and there probably will be, these defections suggest the numbers might get worse for Trump, not better. The vote might be even closer next time, or Trump might lose even more Republicans. This resolution doesn't automatically change anything in terms of Trump's actual power. This isn't a law. It doesn't strip Trump of authority. It doesn't force anything. What it does is send a signal. It says to Trump and to everyone watching, Congress is watching. Congress is reasserting its role. Congress is saying, if you escalate, if you start new operations, if you test this again, we're going to vote again. And next time, we might make it binding. Next time, we might pass something that's actually a law. We might use the power of the purse to defund operations you try to start without us. We might withhold appropriations. This is Congress flexing its institutional muscles after not using them. This is Congress saying we haven't totally forgotten what we're supposed to do. This sets up future conflict and future votes. The question right now is whether the ceasefire holds. If the ceasefire holds, if there's no new escalation, if Iran and the US don't have another serious incident, then this whole thing becomes kind of abstract. The resolution said stop military operations. Well, military operations already stopped because of the ceasefire. So Trump can say, see, problem solved. No contradiction here. Nobody's violating anything. But if Iran and the US have another incident, if there's a new escalation, a new provocation, a new set of strikes, then we're going to see whether Trump actually listens to Congress or whether he's just going to do what he wants anyway and let Congress try to sue him or something. That's where this gets real. That's where Congress's actual power comes into play. Because if Trump starts new operations and Congress votes again and passes a binding law defunding those operations, then we're in genuine constitutional territory. Then you've got the branches genuinely in conflict. So what does this mean for Trump? Well, politically, it's a loss. It's a public rebuke. It's Congress voting on record saying it doesn't support his approach to Iran. That plays badly. That looks bad. Cable news is going to run with it. That hurts Trump's political standing. But operationally, practically speaking, Trump still has room to maneuver. He still has flexibility. He can still claim the resolution doesn't apply because there's already a ceasefire. He can still do military operations if he wants to do them. Congress can vote to stop him, but that doesn't automatically force him to stop. He'd have to comply voluntarily, or Congress will have to get serious about it. Congress will have to defund operations. Congress will have to withhold money. Congress will have to actually use the power of the purse. And Congress hasn't shown it's willing to go that far yet. So there's a gap right now between what Congress is saying and what Congress is willing to enforce. Congress says stop, but Congress hasn't said what Congress is going to do if Trump doesn't stop. What does this mean for Congress? It's a sign that Congress is finally starting to remember that it has power. It's not a total reassertion, don't get me wrong. A total reassertion would look like Congress actually using the power of the purse. Congress would be defunding operations. Congress would be passing binding laws. Congress would be using its actual enforcement authority. Congress could refuse to approve spending on Iran operations. Congress could require additional authorization. Congress could hold up appropriations bills. Congress has all kinds of actual enforcement power if it wanted to use it. This vote is Congress taking a step in that direction. But it's only a step. It's Congress saying we notice what you're doing, we don't like it, and we're going to vote on record about it. That's not nothing. It matters. That vote is on record. Those names are attached. Cable news covered it. The country knows Congress said no. But it's also not the full exercise of power that Congress could be doing. Congress has a lot more power than it's using here. Congress just chose to use some of it. Congress chose to send a political message. Congress chose to create institutional pressure. Whether Congress is willing to actually enforce its power, whether Congress is willing to use the power of the purse, whether Congress is willing to pass binding law, that's still an open question. What does this mean for the future of presidential war power and executive authority? It depends on what happens next. If Iran and the US have another serious incident, and Trump escalates without Congress authorizing it, then this vote becomes a really big deal. It becomes proof that Congress is serious about reasserting itself. It sets a precedent. It says future presidents might actually have to listen to Congress on military decisions. But if the ceasefire holds and nothing else happens, then this vote becomes kind of a historical footnote. It becomes a moment where Congress said something important, but then things moved on and nobody had to actually enforce it. So the real significance of this vote depends on what happens next in the Iran situation and whether Trump actually respects this congressional action or whether he ignores it. Let me be clear about what this resolution is and what it's not. It's not a law. It won't automatically stop Trump from anything. It's Congress saying we think you should stop military operations, and Congress putting that on record for history. That's politically significant because Congress is asserting its institutional role. But legally, operationally, in terms of what actually forces Trump to do things, this doesn't force anything by itself. Trump could ignore it. Congress would then have to pass a binding law, and Trump would probably have to comply with that. Or we get into genuine constitutional crisis territory. But this first step, this concurrent resolution, is a political statement, not a legal mandate. It's Congress drawing a line and saying, we're watching. So what's the real takeaway here? Congress just did something it hasn't done in 51 years. Congress voted to tell the president to stop military operations. Congress is taking an institutional stand. Congress is saying it remembers it has power. Congress is saying the Constitution actually matters. That's significant. That's important. But whether anything actually changes depends on Trump's response and what Congress is willing to do if Trump doesn't comply. For now, we're in a waiting period. This is far from over. The next steps matter a lot. If Trump respects this vote, if Trump actually does scale down operations without Congress pushing harder, then Congress wins. Congress reasserted itself and it worked. But if Trump ignores this vote, if there's a new incident and Trump escalates anyway, then Congress will probably vote again. And the next vote might be different. The next vote might be a binding law. The next vote might include the power of the purse. The next vote might have higher stakes. So Trump's response to this vote is going to shape how Congress responds next. Trump's response is going to determine whether this is a one-time political statement or whether it's the beginning of a real reassertion of congressional power. This is also important for the future. This is important for how Congress approaches executive power going forward. This is important for what Congress does on military spending, military operations, all the other ways Congress can exercise power. Congress just proved it can pass these resolutions. Congress just proved there's enough support to rebuke a president on military policy. That changes the calculus going forward. That makes future votes more likely. That makes Congress more likely to push back on other executive overreach. This is one vote, but it's a vote that signals Congress is waking up to its own power. Now watch whether Trump escalates militarily, launches new operations without Congress, or faces follow-up action like funding restrictions. The war powers vote is on record. The ball is in Trump's court, and the constitutional balance of power hangs in the balance. The story is far from over.